Our scripture reading for today is Matthew 22:15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar," they replied. Then he said to them, "Go, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away.
So my years in Jews for Jesus would see me on street corners quite often in New York City, where I spent most of my ministry, engaging people with the question about Yeshua quite often, mostly Jewish people, because they would see my Jews for Jesus shirt and couldn't resist. Even though many Jewish people, when they see Jews for Jesus, would get upset, they sort of wanted to kind of come in and engage, often to sort of dispute and maybe show that I wasn't a good Jew if I believed in Jesus. And quite often, they would challenge me with questions, sometimes trap questions. Have you ever been caught in a situation where somebody's asking you a question and you got to choose, but you know it's kind of a trap, and they didn't really mean what they were asking? I got that all the time. And I remember one occasion being in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and a couple young ladies came up to me and they just asked me very directly, "Okay, tell me the answer to this. It's yes or no. Do you think homosexuality is a sin or isn't it?" And it's like, if you say yes, they're going to get angry and upset. But if you say no, well, that's not true. So you got to tell the truth, right? And of course, they were waiting for my answer because they knew what I believed, if I believed in the Bible, that it is a sin. But of course, they had me where they wanted me. They're like, "See, we knew it. You're just a bigot. You're just unloving." And that was what they expected. They were waiting to pounce me or spring their trap. And that's not the only time. Sometimes it's on more theological questions. Jesus can't be the Messiah. There's no peace in the world. And I'll have to explain. And of course, they've already got their minds made up. They didn't want to hear. Well, Yeshua here in this passage is trapped. Of course, he got cornered and trapped all the time. And he would oftentimes call the people on their insincerity. He would see right through it. But he would also then give them the truth. And yet somehow he did it in love. I as much as I would want to, I love the way Yeshua would speak even to their hearts, to the hearts of his attackers, in a way that made them see that their question actually had an answer that they didn't expect. So what can we learn from Yeshua's response to this trap, to this trick question that he's cornered into, which looks like a no-win situation? And by the way, in trying to think of, well, how can we apply this to our own lives? This very question of being kind of trapped in a corner and not knowing what's the right answer and knowing that there is no right answer sometimes happens to us, and it's not just on the street when people challenge us theologically or politically or any other way, but it's sometimes in just everyday decisions in our lives when we have to make hard choices and it doesn't look like there's a good answer. What do we do? What do we say? What's the right response in those situations? Well, let's look at Yeshua's response and find out if we can see a way out. What's the way we can find the right answer, even in a no-win situation? Well, I would say we can get out of the trap, and Yeshua shows us how. Lord, I just pray that as we look at this text, you'll open our eyes to see Yeshua even greater, his wisdom, his love, Lord, and his glory. And Lord, I pray that you would help us as we trust in him to learn from him today. In Yeshua's name, amen. So I think, first of all, when we want to know how can we answer this question correctly and get out of a no-win situation, the first way is to discern, as Yeshua shows us, discern the dishonest trap that is about to be set for you. So for Matthew, let's kind of back up and give this passage some context. Right? Matthew has shown us Yeshua's teaching and his ministry throughout the Galilee, and now he's entered Jerusalem just a couple chapters ago. And once he arrives in Jerusalem, the narrative really pushes us forward into this vortex of confrontations with the religious establishment, right? It makes a very intense week for Passover. You'd think he'd be having a nice holiday, but he's in these debates and these discussions and these arguments, and it's only getting more heated. But it started when he entered the city to the crowds hailing him as Messiah, Hosanna to the Son of David, Mashiach ben David, the King of Israel coming riding on a donkey. But after entering the temple and confronting the corrupt system there, he faces constant challenges by the prevailing authorities there, the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. Those are the priests. These influential, powerful groups of Jewish leaders have been sort of on the attack, or perhaps on the counterattack, since he's come to challenge their claim to authority. But his answer to their question, who gave you this authority, is what? Well, he doesn't really tell them the answer, but he gives them a set of 3 parables describing the Jerusalem leadership as being far from the Lord, far from serving the Lord, but rather fighting against him, just as it had opposed the prophets of old, even until this time. Now, I think it's important for us to remember that even though Yeshua is confronting and arguing and doing some sort of theological, spiritual battle here with the religious Jewish leadership, that he's not nullifying God's love or his commitment or his plans for the Jewish people. But he's kind of setting an indictment against Israel's spiritual shepherds, which again is what the prophets before him had done. Ezekiel chapter 34, we hear these words, "Woe, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock?" Well, Yeshua is going to express in the next chapter some woes to the shepherds of Israel. But Ezekiel went on to say, "Behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will demand my sheep for them and make them cease from feeding sheep. But then," he says, "I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David." Those words of Ezekiel we see playing out now in real time in this part of the book of Matthew. But as the result of that challenge, the religious leaders have been trying to find a way to destroy Yeshua and his claims. Ever since chapter 12, that's the word they used. We got to find a way to destroy him. Now they look, as they argue with him, not only to discredit him, but, if possible, to find a pretext to have him arrested. We just saw that in chapter 21. And then they could bring his movement to a grinding halt. Spoiler alert, 2,000 years later, we're here worshiping Yeshua. It didn't work. So in response to his 3 parables, what do we see in verse 15? The Pharisees went and plotted together. It's sort of like they had to go and kind of get together, take a little sort of conference, and they plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. They need to come up with 3 attacks. That's what follows. After the 3 parables are these 3 attacks or challenging questions by the religious leadership to get him, to trap him in his words and get him into trouble. So let's not be fooled. I think the motives here are set out right at the beginning. These questions we're going to hear aren't sincere, but they are, Yeshua responds sincerely. So they go and they huddle up together, finding a way to ensnare Yeshua. And in verse 16 it says, and they sent their disciples to him, that's the Pharisees, along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any. Well, wait, let's go back a little bit. This is kind of an interesting group here. You know, there's a saying, politics makes strange bedfellows, and you know, we see that not only in our politics, but especially in other countries where governments have to form a coalition. And they say, you know what, these different parties all hate each other, but in order for them to sort of have some influence, they'll work together to form sort of this coalition. And of course, that was borrowed from Shakespeare, from Tempest, where one of the characters says, misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. So the Pharisees and the Herodians, they would hardly have concurred on any subject, but they can agree on one thing, their opposition to Yeshua, because he's been challenging their claims to authority, and that's caused them a lot of misery. And they're like, okay, misery makes for strange bedfellows. So maybe if they team up, they can combine their strength and take him down. Now, we're more familiar with the Pharisees. We've seen them throughout the book of Matthew, and they are the meticulous Torah keepers, really the forerunners of rabbinic Judaism. We've already seen their confrontations with Jesus. But the Herodians, who are they? They're less familiar. They're not mentioned hardly, just a couple times in the Gospels. But they may be a party that was either associated with Herod the Great or with his son Antipas, Herod Antipas, who was kind of ruled over the Galilee region. And they would have been more of a political faction. So while the Herodians, you know, their preference was, I think, that a descendant of Herod would someday sit on the throne again. And that would be their vision. Not a descendant of David, by the way. So they weren't interested in Yeshua being the Messiah. But they also benefited from the Roman occupation. That made them a lot different than the Pharisees who were trying to teach Jewish people to follow the Torah. The Herodians would have been in league with Rome because Rome gave Herod and his descendants their positions, you know, appointed him as king over the land of Israel. And so it was really a very political connection and very pro-Roman position. So on the one hand, you have these two groups, both of them teaming up, but they represent these opposite extremes. One is the religious extreme, and the other one is the political extreme. And they stand before Yeshua with these two conflicting positions, and it means that no matter how you answer, you're going to get somebody upset. So how will Yeshua answer? By the way, let's remember in Mark chapter 8, Yeshua said to his disciples, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And I don't think he meant that they both had the same leaven. One had one kind of leaven, which was this religious extreme of trusting in their religious perfection to earn God's favor. And the other one had another kind of leaven, which was trusting in the systems of the world and the resources of this world to solve all of our problems. So as we read this passage, we get the inside scoop ahead of time, right? Their whole agenda is to ensnare Yeshua. And then their introduction is so kind of obscenely obvious how fake their flattery is, right? It's dripping with condescension as they say to him, Teacher, they call him Rabbi. We know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, and you are not partial to any. You are just above it all, right? You don't care who you offend, so start offending. We're going to get you in trouble with somebody here. It's kind of a setup, really, not really a kind introduction. But then they lay down their question, verse 17. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? What do you think? And I think this is more than just, let's ask his opinion. These are these leaders of Jerusalem's kind of political and religious leadership coming to this person who is claiming to be the Messiah. It's like, let's get your official position on paying taxes to Caesar. What do you think? What's the official position of Yeshua of Nazareth? Go ahead, we're going to record this. Now, by the way, the Roman poll tax levied upon the people of Israel, it had been imposed on every citizen even women and slaves as well as men. So every individual Israeli had to pay this tax ever since Rome began its direct rule over the region back around 6 AD. It wasn't long after that. Well, before I get there, it's this poll tax would have been a once-a-year payment of a day's wage, had to be paid in Roman coin. And the irony is that you're paying the Romans to help cover the expenses of their occupation of your country, right? Your taxes pay Rome to finance your own oppression. What insult. What a thing to say you are forced to pay this tax. So you can't imagine that it wasn't long before patriotic Jews would have revolted against this. In fact, there was a rebellion not long after the tax was imposed, led by another guy from Galilee named Judah, and he created a rebellion against Rome. Well, guess what happened? The Romans crushed him. But he was remembered, I think, when they saw this Galilean named Yeshua. They thought, oh, let's see what this guy has to say and what Rome might do to him. But Judah, I think, in this rebellion kind of inspired what later became the Zealots, the ones who would fight against the Roman occupation. So what do they ask? They ask, is it lawful to pay the poll tax to Caesar or not? Now, I don't think when they say that, they don't mean according to Roman law. Do you think the law says we need to? Yeah, of course the Roman law says you got to pay your taxes. The verb could also be translated, is it permissible? Should we? Do we have to? Ought we to? But also that word lawful, when it's coming from Pharisees and religious leaders, probably means, is it violating the Torah or isn't it? Jewish law. So they believe now, with this question, they have Yeshua in a corner. Because what are his possible answers here? They pretty much say, do we pay taxes or not? It's one or the other. You kind of have to give us one of those answers. So if he answers, well, no, Jews should not give taxes to Caesar, well, then what would happen? Well, this group of Herodians would go right to the Romans and incite them to crush Yeshua like they crushed that other Galilean rebel. But if he says, well, yes, go ahead, you should pay taxes to Rome, well, the Pharisees then could incite the Jewish populace against him because they're looking for a Messiah who would deliver Israel from its oppressors. So which extreme will he answer to? Because either way he chooses, he loses. So Yeshua is faced with this no-win, either-or scenario. And before we go on, it's just very clear from the beginning, Matthew is letting us know that this is a false question, insincere question, a trap. And Yeshua is aware of it. It drips off the page. But what do you do? What does Yeshua do when he's faced with this scenario where we're going to find out? The question, I think, again, as we go back to our own application is, what do we do when the world comes at us and says, you have this one choice. Which one's it going to be? And you can kind of apply that to whatever situation you're in right now. I've got a couple things going on too with kids in school and going to college and like, how do I pay for this? And then you get told, well, these are the options. But you have to kind of look a little closer at the options and just understand, well, is this really my only options? Are these really the best options that are before me? These might be legitimate questions, but the answer might not be what the world offers. We can turn to God, look for his answer, and ask the Lord to help us see beyond the corner that we feel trapped in. But let's go on because of Yeshua's response now, not only to discern the dishonest trap, but to distinguish between the different stamps. Okay, I'm going to explain that in a second. But in verse 18, Yeshua, it says, perceived their malice. He knew what was going on, their evil intentions. Now, in a lot of gospel accounts, we're told that Yeshua can essentially see right into people's hearts and know their thoughts, and that's true. In this case, though, I think their words have made their insincerity all too obvious, and that it's sometimes hard to discern when people come to you and they start saying nice things to you, and you're like, I really appreciate that. And then you realize later, wait a minute, they were just buttering me up to go in for the kill. But in this case, their words just made it all too obvious. Their false flattery was just framing their question. But he lets them know right away. He's on to their game. And so he calls them out. He calls them hypocrites. That word means essentially an actor playing a part. You're up there telling somebody one thing, but you don't believe it at all. But despite the setup, what does he do? Well, he doesn't shy away from the question. It may look like he stalls for time, but no, that's not what he's doing. Look what happens. He answers, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarius. No, he's not stalling for time by saying, "Somebody go find a coin," but he's really about to make a powerful object lesson for us. Actually, I'll see if I have my slides here today. We're going to get out of the trap with Yeshua. But this is a painting I've always loved since my childhood. So sorry if I take you on one of my art lectures here, but this is from Titian, painter from the Renaissance, greatest painter in the world from Venice, and it's called The Tribute Money. And I love the look on Yeshua's face as he turns to this man who doesn't look all that nice. He's kind of rough and tough and a little bit of a sneer on his face, and he's finally got that coin he's showing him. And Yeshua, he's not exactly touching the coin, but he's pointing to the coin, but he's also looking into the eyes or looking into the heart of the man, and I think that's part of Yeshua's response here. But let's talk about this coin, because he says, "Show me the coin that's used for the tax." Well, for one thing, the Romans would only accept a Roman coin, the denarius, to be the thing they received from their subjects as their tax. So you couldn't use your Jewish money, you had to use the Roman money. And that, at the time of this passage, would have been minted under the Emperor Tiberius, Caesar. So when he asks the question, whose likeness and whose inscription's on the coin? Well, this is what they would have seen, because we actually have seen these coins archaeologically discovered. There's a beautiful rendition of Tiberius's punim, there his face, and there's a stamp of his face. There's a stamp of an inscription around it as well. And so when he brought that forward and he said, whose image is on, whose likeness is on the coin, they could see Tiberius, and whose inscription, and what does it say? And what it says is Tiberius Caesar Divi Augusti Filius Augustus. Okay, let's translate that into the august Tiberius Caesar, son of the God, or the divine Augustus. And on the backside you see seated on the throne is the goddess Pax, or peace, the goddess of peace. And the words around that are Pontifex Maximus, or high priest. So not only do the Jewish people have to finance their own oppressors, but they're forced to do it with a coin that would have been an abomination to the Jewish people. It's an assault right away on the first two commandments, isn't it? You shall have no other God before me. Well, who's this guy? He claims to be son of the divine. And you shall not make for yourself any graven images or worship them. And here Rome is saying, no, yes, you will. Use this coin to do it. So maybe this is a question concerning the Torah after all. In fact, no good Jew would be found in the temple precincts with one of these coins because of its blasphemy on the image. So it's interesting that when Yeshua says, "Show me the coin," somebody in the crowd actually does, which you might think would be kind of embarrassing, unless they were the Herodians, because they were very pro-Roman, not quite as scrupulous about those things. So they brought him the coin, and one much like this one Yeshua pointed to. And again, he asks, whose image is on the coin? Well, our money, our bills say, "In God we trust." The Romans' coins essentially said, "In the God Caesar you better trust." So this creates kind of a challenge for Yeshua's audience. Who are they putting their trust in? Is it in the gods of this world, or is it on the living, true God of Israel? But what does Yeshua go on to say? "Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So, how do we get out of the trap? Well, we got to discern the dishonest trap, for one thing. We need to distinguish between the different stamps, and by stamps I mean that image that's stamped on that coin, or now we're looking at the image stamped in our hearts. And now, in response to that, we deliver what is due. We deliver, we return, we restore, we render what needs to be rendered. So can we serve both God and this world? Yeshua did say earlier, you can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve two masters. Especially when this world is brimming with false gods, right? And demanding your worship. And I think that's kind of a question Yeshua raises when he makes this statement. So many theologians point to this passage to say, well, you see, Yeshua kind of establishes here this separation of church and state. Yes, we can be good citizens of the state, and yes, we can also be good citizens of our faith community, and they can kind of coexist like this. And there's something there, of course. We do want to be good citizens, and Paul and Peter say some things about that as well, about honoring the authorities, about paying your taxes. It's a reminder to me of what happened when Israel went into exile, when we as a nation and as a kingdom suddenly became slaves and servants in Babylon. Do you remember what Jeremiah said in chapter 29? He says, when you go there, settle down, have a family, do your business, and seek the welfare of the city. Be good residents of that place where God sends you. So he doesn't say, fight against the system, but he does say, I think, not to be shaped into the culture of the pagan world around you. So yes, pay your taxes, do your civic duty, but can you keep that separate from your faith life? Well, the Romans didn't think so, right? Because they put divine Augustus on their coins. So if you're going to do business, you have to engage with that false worship. I'm also reminded of Daniel, who in exile with his friends, they were forced to take new names. Their names represented their relationship to God, and yet now they were forced to take names that were Babylonian and that were related to the Babylonian gods. And yet, in their lives and in their hearts, they maintain their faith to the Lord. So we render to God what belongs to him, and to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Now, render, in my translation here, has a lot of definitions in the dictionary. You go look it up, there's probably 12 or maybe 20 definitions of the word render. You might render fat, right? You cook down the fat, that's rendering. That's not one of the definitions I'm talking about. When I use the word render, it's to paint a picture or draw something. You render an image. But in this case, render means to give or to pay something to someone. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. But the Greek word here really implies something closer to what Michelle's translation read, to give back, to return. So if Caesar made the denarius, then give it back to him. It technically belongs to the Roman government if he asks for it. But what do you give back to God? And Yeshua's answer also reveals something about his priorities, right? And he's not devoted to the temporal things of this world, but to the things that are God's, to the kingdom of God. His goal in coming to Israel isn't to overthrow political powers, even though God's kingdom will do that. And it wasn't even simply to overturn the religious system, even though he is doing that, and he's telling the religious leaders that's happening. But his goal was to really overthrow the power of sin. That's what he came to do, which is, of course, a more oppressive evil than any government could be. So his answer avoids the trap of having to choose between these two religious or political extremes, but instead his answer, like that painting, goes to our hearts, right? He sees our real need. So what do we render to Caesar? Now that's a challenge, because the world kind of entices you or sometimes wants to force on you the image of its stamp, right? To stamp you into its shape. To bear the image of the gods of this world. But that very word, when Yeshua says, whose likeness is on the coin, how can we not think about what we read at the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26? Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. So we all have been stamped, have been shaped into the image to reflect God. We belong to him, right? That coin belongs to Caesar, but what do we belong to? We belong to God. So we are to pay back, to give, to return to God what belongs to him. So whatever the world has, the coins and all the other things we fret about and wonder and worry about, let the world keep it. You can do the business you have to do, but in the end, we return that where it belongs. But what belongs to God? What are we supposed to give back or return to him? Well, our very lives, right? Our every breath, our every thought, our every decision, everything we say and do for others. And all those things, are we doing it as unto the Lord? Are we returning what belongs to God, to him, the life that he's given us? There's this amazing quote from Adam Clarke, 1831 scholar, that I found. And he said, the image of, and he's speaking about this passage, the image of princes stamped on their coin denotes that temporal things belong all to their government. The image of God stamped on the soul denotes that all its faculties and powers belong to the Most High and should be employed in his service. God has shaped us, and we need to return to him all that we are. So, has the world and has the culture stamped you and shaped you? Or is God the shape and the image that you want to reflect? Romans 12:2 reminds us, do not be conformed, right? Do not be stamped and shaped to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So let's render to God what belongs to him. By the way, a little story. I don't know why I learned this. I think I was reading one of my kids' magazines from the library, for little children. It had a little story about George Washington. And it said that in 1790, he borrowed 2 books from the New York Society Library. When he was president in New York, this was essentially the beginnings of what it would become the Library of Congress. And George Washington, I'm sure, borrowed several books, but 2 of them he never returned. George Washington. So after he chopped down the cherry tree, he hid his library books too. So he went through his life, and he's been through several lifetimes now, never returning what was owed. Can you imagine the overdue fees for that? Now, in 2010, representatives from Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington, actually returned one of the books. Well, they replaced it. So that's good. He's got one of those taken care of. The other one, though, is still way overdue. I don't think George Washington could afford the fines for that. So we're supposed to return to God what we owe to him. Now, that story of George Washington reminds me, well, what do we owe to God? In fact, we owe him more than we could pay him. Fines that we could never afford, because the cost of our sin is death. It was incurred upon us, actually, by our first father, Adam, and we've been suffering from the overdue fines ever since. So how can we return to God what is due to him? To deliver to him what is due? Well, it's because Yeshua, the Messiah, came. That's what God came to do. To give his life for our debt. Because he's the only one who can afford it, who's worthy to do it. God came in person to take our penalty. So in him, only in him can you return to God what belongs to God. Not in your own strength, not in your own efforts. So what an amazing thing that Yeshua not only tells us that we have to do, but provides the ability to do through his sacrifice for us. So Yeshua takes this insincere trap question, and he doesn't dismiss it. He doesn't just stop by calling them hypocrites and then walks away, which he could have, but he even uses this snare, this effort to trap him, to turn it around to teach us an important and profound truth about who we really belong to and who we should serve and how to get out of the trap that we're in. He not only shows us and his disciples, but he shows his heart, which is for his attackers, to reveal to them the real question behind the false question that they were asking. So that's amazing to me as we read through these passages, and we're going to get to some even more intense discussions that Yeshua has to say to the Pharisees. And while it sounds very harsh, it's really not Yeshua fighting with them. It's Yeshua fighting for them. He wants them to see what they need and that he provided it. Unfortunately, at the end of the passage, what are we told? Verse 22. And hearing this, they were amazed, of course. His words were incredible. They left them speechless. But would their words pierce any of their hearts? We're simply told they left him. And leaving him, they went away. Now again, we do find later on in the book of Acts, there will be some priests, there will be some Pharisees that come to Yeshua, but at this point, it's sort of a sad moment where they walk away. And I guess that's the challenge for us, as we hear these words, as we hear what Yeshua is telling us and offering to us, what do we do with that? Do we say, well, that's nice, but I'm going to go kind of still do what I got to do, the way I do it? Or do we remember, no, he's not fighting against us, he's fighting for us. He wants us to surrender our hearts, to humble our hearts, not to walk away, but to receive that challenge to return everything we are to God, and also to receive the provision that he paid so that we can return ourselves to God. So we want to avoid this trap before we choose, because Yeshua has set us free from the trap. There's a beautiful verse in Psalm 124, actually verses 6 and 7. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us to be torn by their teeth. Our soul has escaped as a bird out of the snare of the trapper. The snare is broken, and we've escaped. So Yeshua, in our place, faced our biggest test, and it wasn't against the Herodians and the Pharisees. It was against the consequences of sin, the greatest test of all. And he delivered us from that trap. He delivered us from death and gave us eternal life. Because of that, we could be confident in him and confident in every situation, every corner that we feel trapped in. Like, no, the one who delivered me, the one who gave his life for me, he's with me now in this situation. He sets us free, and he has set us free from the trap. So how do we make the right choice when we're cornered by the world, we're cornered in a no-win situation? Well, let's discern the dishonest trap. Let's distinguish between the different stamps, the image of this world or the image of God. And then let's return what is due. That's our heart, our soul, and our strength to the Lord our God. Trust in him because he delivered you, and he's able to deliver in any circumstance. Let's pray. Father, thank you for these words of Yeshua. And even this argument, this debate, sometimes you don't want to even deal with some of these uncomfortable arguments. But Lord, thank you that we can walk with Yeshua through them and to hear his words that aren't just sort of a pithy little proverbial quote, but really drive at the heart of what's needed. And the real trap isn't just the question of what to do in the situation, but is, how can I give everything I have to God and not be trapped by this world? And thank you that Yeshua came to set us free from the trap by giving himself for us. Help us live for you, Yeshua, and that you live and work in us in those situations where we do feel trapped. I just pray that for anyone who does feel in that corner right now, we could stand in Yeshua's corner and know that he has everything we need, including, Lord, salvation forever in his presence. So we give you thanks and praise in Yeshua's name. Amen.